Chicago, 1895. A city that believed it had arrived, united with a common goal, to build the next regarded port of civilization. And can we call it that? Civilization began with the shared language, a tool for building and connecting. But for others, it was also a tool for deceiving and dividing. In safe neighborhoods like the common woman named May Buscarin, who had mostly civil lives, safely surrounded by family, neighbors, tradition, community, corner bakeries, delis, butchers, shared recipes, and shared national pride, had all this up until some jealous thugs spot your smile and decide it's time to redistribute your happiness with some brass knuckles. Now, May Buscarin, she was a pitcher in a female baseball league and spent time with her family during the off-season upon a off-street that children played tag on the damp dirt roads that were surrounded by dark, dirty wooden structures which held families gathered in their front lawns. On the other hand, other people shared the same streets and ideas but worked to disrupt the civil flow of society that was caused by various sorts of criminals, like gang members, selfish thieves, bad cops, crooked politicians, killers, robbers, knife-swinging pukes, thugs, sluggers, cheaters, scam artists, and victims of society, and the poor bastards who think they're the good guys because they got screwed first. Same streets, same ideas, different ending. Chicago would either greet you with a smile and a handshake on one street, then have brass knuckles and a scam on the next. Ethnic lines shaped food, language, and streets. It was German in one direction, Bohemian in the next, and American. Chicago had up until the 80s many ethnically distinct neighborhoods in Chicago. There were Jewish, Irish, Italian, Lithuanian, Polish, Mexican, Black, Swedish, Dutch, Puerto Rican, Ukrainian, and others who all had their own churches and bakeries and good times, and some bad. Not only ethnicity drew the distinct line between neighborhoods, but there was crime, and strata also was a character that made one a little more special than the other. Hey, let's go this way and get a cannoli. No, I'd rather go this way and get robbed. Now, at the bottom of Chicago were the thugs who painted the dirt roads with red blood. There was a gang called the Market Street Gang. They were a Democrat-led crew of thugs who cozied up to police and politicians who hated the Republicans. They worked hand in hand with them. And they beat voters who picked the wrong tickets, slugged Republicans like E.M. Dixon half to death, and straight up murdered Gus Collander for daring to stand in their way. Ballot boxes got stolen, riots exploded, the whole damn city watched in terror. And by February 18th, 1895, 8 of the 40-plus goons were arrested. Dave McCormick was dragged back from Detroit. George McCandless, alias of Graham Hamilton, nabbed for his part in the Dixon assault. Citizens screamed for justice of the murders, but politicians needed these bandits to shove their votes through. And Chicago dreamed of evolving with the civility into a perfect society, while the machine whispered, "We control how you live and how you vote." And I bet a lot of normal people were saying something like, "I just want to live my life and vote my way. But they want to tell me how to live my life and threaten me into voting for them." I bet you that's what they said. That's not a direct quote, I'm just making that up. But immigrants at that time all had it hard too. When they arrived, they didn't speak the language, and they had a lot of people using that against them. But the real call to corruption was the politicians that needed the bandits to shove the votes through. And the gang didn't stop at elections. They preyed on the newcomers pouring in, turning the city's growth into their feeding ground. And there was women that got a lot of job opportunities by creeps wanting to close access to pretty faces. And the immigrant women suffered mostly from all this. There were fresh arrivals that were targeted by crooks who weaponized the language barrier against them. And since 1894, immigration officials like Mayor Swift pushed more police protection against rising robberies on trains and streets and hotels. That didn't always work, though. So, in 1895, a young German girl, she spoke no English. She stepped off the train, and then thugs steal everything from her. Pressure her to the Kinsey Street hotel. Got 2 lousy meals, demanding cash from her for it. She hands over her last $5, gets $1 back. Then they steal that for escort back to the depot. She's broke, stranded. And of the people that recorded things back in the day, they wrote that a lot of immigrants that showed up to Chicago were displeased. A lot of them said that this is Chicago. This is what Chicago looks like. They weren't happy with what Chicago was supposed to look like as a white city of all these great things that went on there. And they showed up, and all they seen were dark wooden houses and dirt roads and gangsters in the street and stuff like that. Then they stepped off the train and got to immigration, and or the city that welcomed them in the immigration, and they brought them up to the immigration room to get them, settled and to where they're going to go next. And that's where a lot of these records come from, in these quotes. And when they left the immigration room and they got into the city and started walking down the streets, they would run into the gangs, like the Market Street gang, for instance, who would try to lure them up on top of the viaduct and have them play a game of shells with them. And if they didn't want to play the game of shells, they would beat them for it. So it's either you play the game and get scammed, or you get your ass kicked. So that's what they were doing to a lot of immigrants, or scamming them one way or the other. Now, Market Street back in the 1890s was on the north south side of the river, and to the eastern part of that. It's not there anymore. Or it's maybe now called part of it is called Wacker Drive now. And the Market Street gang would stand on the viaduct and play the game of shells, and sometimes the cops would come and break them up. And one time they killed a police officer, threw him, or maybe near death. I'm not sure if he actually died. They threw him over the side of the viaduct. And John Samson was a leader of that gang, of the Market Street gang at the time in the 1890s, especially 1895. He had an alias of Major. They called him Major Samson. And Major Samson was a 33-year-old guy. In the year 1895, he was arrested and charged with pickpocketing a couple of women out of state. He was a 33-year-old thief who was about 165 pounds with hazel eyes and dark brown hair. He was born in 1857 on Locust Street and Franklin Street in Chicago. And by the time Samson was 12 years old, he was already part of a gang of youths that robbed stores and terrorized the neighborhood with theft and vagrancy, who harassed not only storekeepers but neighborhood people too. He was repeatedly arrested for petty crimes, but was never harshly punished. And as he grew older, he became the leader of the Market Street gang because he was the most clever and daring thief around, which is why they gave him the alias Major. Hey, Major, go rob those people over there. He's like, I'll do it. And then the Democrats are like, that's our guy. Samson branched out as a shell worker, scamming immigrants and neighborhood people however he could. And he was arrested several times and served time in the Bridewell for running shell games. And since the time that Samson was 22 years old, he was regarded as a desperate thief. And unlike his gang peers who did a lot of pickpocketing and breaking into houses, Samson would he liked to attack people and slug victims in the streets and rob them. And in 1894, for example, Samson slugged a man in Ulrich's Hall on the north side of Chicago, and then he robbed the man of his gold watch and money from his pockets. Pretty wild dude. He somehow escaped his convictions because he was a good talker. He was a very persuasive dude. That's how he got a lot of good jobs, and he got away with a lot of crimes. And he was only known for one thing on the north side of Chicago, and he was known as a slugger. And sometimes police were able to find that Samson was committed a lot of other crimes. Like when they would catch him, like, oh, you're the same guy that did this, or But the interesting thing is that these gang members weren't always from broken homes or poor households. Samson's parents were well-respected people who lived on number 1 Chestnut Street in Chicago at the time. His father was a stone cutter. His brother, William Samson, was a respectable dude who lived on Clifton Street in Lakeview. The family was said to be highly respected and esteemed on the north side of Chicago. And John Samson at the time was a curb inspector working for the city during the day, and then he was a thief at night. He was on the payroll of the city payroll up until the time of the murder of Gus Collander. So he was a respectable dude at certain times. And then other times he was out causing chaos, right? Samson was known as a thief, a strong-arm crook, a shell worker, and a thug. Some police hated him and wished they could get him convicted and locked up for good. And since the time that the shell-working thugs threw the policeman over the viaduct, Samson was getting away with murder, even if blood wasn't on his own hands. They had him on vagrancy warrants more times than police could count on their fingers and toes, they said. Because, Samson was a smart guy. He worked in a few places before he was a curb inspector. He worked at the docks for a while. He even became a bank president for some time in another location. It's hard to believe, isn't it? But maybe he was a bank president and he just started robbing them and then they fired him. Who knows? That's a possibility. But it's good talking. There's persuasive people that could talk and scam and lie and stuff like that. They get real far in life. Take that as a lesson. Samson's cunning and persuasive speech landed him high regards from prominent people and politicians. And on election day, Senator O'Malley had a carriage transport the gang to several polling locations to assault the citizens who voted against the Democrats. They were also trying to steal the ballot boxes from the locations to change the votes. And the death of Collander was attributed to this, where he tried stopping them from stealing the votes, and they killed him for it in 1894. I have a lot of notes on this gang, but I'm not going to put them all into this one episode because it's going to take too long. Maybe if somebody asks, if so many people ask, then I'll do it, but I highly doubt it. So anyways, I wanted to bring up the civility in Chicago where there was normal people like May that was living normal lives and normal things were going on. And then on the other streets, there was gangs that tried to disrupt the civility of society. And of course, they had voting problems back then too. You would think everybody was nice and standing in single file line, just waiting to cast their votes quietly. But no, there was guys that were there to disrupt the voting, and they beat people and killed people that got in the way. But I think today they would call that a peaceful protest. And coincidentally, Democrats are doing that today, aren't they? Kind of strange. Over 100 years, the same thing. But I didn't know that before I started researching the Market Street gang. I just seen this gang in the news, the old news articles, and I was like, hey, let me look into these guys and talk about it a little bit. I don't know how much more territorial these guys were to fight other gangs that crossed wrong lines, but any more than they were thieves or just trying to make some money and scam people. I think a lot of them, in a couple decades later, ended up bootlegging during the Prohibition and evolving into the North Side gang, which was a huge rival of Al Capone later on, decades later.